Why does your company actually exist? I mean, really, it sounds like a philosophical question, right? But it actually has a very rigid, mathematical, economic answer. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking why the very foundation of your organizational chart is, well, literally collapsing, and exactly how you can survive it. You see, for decades, the traditional hierarchy has been the undisputed, absolute blueprint for building any serious business. But what happens when the fundamental economic rules that originally built that hierarchy are completely rewritten by artificial intelligence? Today, we're diving into a profound structural shift based on recent research and hard data that definitively outlines what the post-hierarchy firm actually looks like. So let's get into it.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the end of hierarchy. Look at where the friction went. Explore the fiduciary wedge. Define what humans above the loop actually means. And finally, arrive at the organizational singularity.
All right, let's jump right into part one, the end of hierarchy.
Okay, let's rewind the clock for a second to see exactly how we got here and why the traditional firm is suddenly facing an existential crisis. If you think about it, the history of organizational design is basically a relay race of brilliant thinkers, each solving one limitation at a time. Back in 1937, Ronald Coase proved that we needed hierarchies just to manage external market transaction costs. Essentially, it was just way cheaper to put a bunch of people in a building together than to negotiate a brand new contract for every single little task. Then, in 1947, Herbert Simon chimed in with bounded rationality, showing we needed formal structures simply because human cognitive capacity is limited. Our brains can only hold so much, so we built specialized departments to cope. Fast forward to 1976, military strategist John Boyd proved with his famous OODA loop that decision tempo, pure speed, is what wins wars. That military tempo quickly bled into corporate structure, pushing firms to scale up their learning and prediction capabilities. And that evolution kept going right up until now, the 2026 convergence. This is the precise moment where AI dissolves these old boundaries entirely, effectively turning the classic hierarchy into an obsolete piece of history.
Think about it this way. The industrial era firm was designed for a world where getting humans to coordinate was incredibly expensive. You needed a complex org chart just to figure out how to pass a memo around the building. Today, you have to realize that your hierarchy is actually just a latency map. It's just a map of how long it takes for an idea to travel from point A to point B. And AI compresses those firm-to-firm integration costs exponentially. In tech terms, we're moving from a messy O of n squared complexity down to a streamlined O of n. In the past, adding more people to a project meant creating this tangled exponential web of meetings and emails. AI flattens that completely. Because AI makes coordination cheap, the traditional pyramid org chart is completely done for. Instead, the new model is an hourglass. You've got a generative interface on top, a standardized protocol at the waist, and a massive market of micro-specialized AI agents doing the actual heavy lifting on the bottom.
Which brings us to part two, where the friction went. So, you might be wondering, do the costs of doing business just magically vanish when you plug in AI? Not at all. They just pack up and move to an entirely new location. In the past, we were bottlenecked by gathering information, agonizing over negotiation terms, or trying to enforce contracts. Those are the old frictions. Today, your coordination budget is spent entirely on a completely new set of headaches: calibrating trust, managing AI hallucinations, and verifying outputs. For instance, instead of paying a massive team of lawyers to draft a 50-page contract from scratch over 3 painful weeks, you are now paying for the time it takes one expert to verify that an AI didn't just completely hallucinate a non-existent legal precedent into that contract in 3 seconds. The firm boundaries are actively redrawing themselves around whichever of these new frictions is currently dominating your specific industry. The big takeaway here? You simply aren't paying for human coordination anymore, you are paying for human verification.
And guys, this exact friction is causing a massive cultural rupture. Look at these staggering numbers from recent empirical data of knowledge workers. 79% of organizations are facing serious adoption challenges. Over half of the C-suite literally say AI is tearing their company apart. And honestly, this is the wildest part. Nearly a third of workers admit to actively sabotaging the rollout. Yes, corporate sabotage is back in style. Workers are purposefully dragging their feet because the anxiety is very, very real. Meanwhile, 92% of executives are quietly cultivating an AI elite tier within their ranks, a small group of hyper-adaptable employees who get the best tools and total autonomy. This clearly proves that the real blocker to capturing value isn't the AI technology itself, not at all. The true blocker is workflow engineering, cultural inertia, and the profound human friction of fundamentally changing how we actually do our jobs.
Moving right along to part three, the fiduciary wedge.
Okay, so if the hierarchy is dead and all the friction is moved over to managing trust and culture, what actually holds a company together? Like, why have a company at all? Well, the answer lies in this entirely new concept called the fiduciary wedge. Simply put, this is the persistent gap between what an AI can technically execute on its own and what it can actually be held legally and ethically accountable for. I want you to think of your company less like a well-oiled machine doing work and more like a reinforced bucket that holds legal liability. If something breaks, if a massive mistake is made, someone has to get sued or take the fall, right? That bucket is your firm. The daily coordination dissolves, but the fiduciary responsibility holder, the human element, has to remain.
And the absolute crucial point is captured perfectly right here. The algorithm decided is never, ever an acceptable final answer. Imagine standing in a courtroom and telling a judge, "Sorry, Your Honor, the large language model made a mistake." Yeah, no. That won't fly. It won't fly with a judge, it won't fly with a regulator, and it definitely won't fly with an angry customer. A human must always stand behind certain decisions. Accountability is this uniquely human burden that just cannot be automated away. Which brings us directly to the question of how we actually architect the daily workflows inside this brand new accountability shell.
That brings us to part 4, humans above the loop.
So, we have to divide our workflows into two very distinct categories using a statistical concept. In statistics, sigma measures variance, unpredictability, or risk. So a low sigma decision has clear parameters and predictable outcomes. Think of a routine expense approval or drafting a standard weekly report. You route those directly to AI agents who earn their authority through demonstrated performance over time. A high sigma decision, on the other hand, is ambiguous, high stakes, and deeply value-laden, like deciding to fire an executive or completely pivoting the company's market strategy. You route those directly to humans. Now, this boundary is constantly moving as AI gets smarter, but the core operating logic stays exactly the same. Human energy must be reserved strictly for those high sigma exceptions.
To really see this structural inversion in practice, let's look at McKinsey's work with the American Arbitration Association. Back in their old workflow, reviewing a single arbitration case was an agonizing, highly manual process. It required humans to manually gather thousands of disparate data points and exhibits, meticulously review the facts to construct a timeline, write memos arguing both sides of the dispute, and then finally render a decision. This single process used to take highly paid human reviewers weeks of expensive linear time to complete. It was a massive bottleneck for them.
But today, the workflow is entirely transformed. A multi-agent team executes the core work end-to-end. Software agents construct the timeline, review all the facts simultaneously, argue both sides against each other in real time, and summarize a balanced decision. The human arbitrator now sits above the loop, not in the loop. The human no longer builds the puzzle, they just look at the finished picture and verify if it's correct. The human simply provides the judgment layer to validate the outcome, asking one single, incredibly powerful question: do I agree with the decision the agents reached? This right here is exactly what it means to operate as an accountability shell.
Yet, despite how incredibly powerful this new architecture is, the data tells a pretty frustrating story. Even though 72% of CEOs now personally identify as the main AI decision maker, a staggering 95% of organizations are struggling to capture AI value at scale. Only a tiny 5% are actually pulling it off. So why the massive gap? Well, are you secretly keeping humans in the loop just because it makes you feel safe? Honestly, that feeling of safety is exactly what's throttling your scale. The failing 95% make humans approve every single minor step. That scales linearly and completely chokes the entire system with human latency. You absolutely must move humans above the loop if you want to succeed.
And that leads us to our final stop, part 5, the organizational singularity.
To really grasp what is coming next, we have to understand this concept of domain collapse. This happens when intelligence infrastructure converts a domain from being expertise-bound to compute-bound, effectively solving the domain entirely. Think about the history of artificial light. Before widespread electricity, lighting a home required real expertise. You had to trim wicks, render tallow, maintain oil levels. Electricity made it compute-bound. You literally just flip a switch and the problem is solved. Well, AI is flipping the switch on human coordination. The expertise previously required to organize hundreds of people is collapsing into pure computational power.
And that realization leads us straight to the organizational singularity, the complete domain collapse of organizing human effort. Defending your old organizational chart as some rigid, unchangeable structure is a fatal failure mode in an era where pure speed and tempo determine who survives. If your legal department or your middle management is keeping humans on the critical path out of sheer habit or maybe a false sense of control, you are actively engineering your own obsolescence.
So as you look at your company tomorrow, remember the core takeaway from our time together today. Your business is now an accountability shell, not a coordination machine. You have a vital choice to make. Where is human latency still blocking your success? Are you going to move humans off the critical path and onto the exception path? Or will AI-native competitors simply route right around you while you sit in yet another status meeting? Think about that. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and I'll leave you to ponder that crucial question.